Well, let's speak to Mark Regev now, Senior Advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister. Mark, welcome to the programme again. Your response, first of all, to that chilling warning from Hamas on hostages.
So obviously it's part of their psychological terror against us. But at the same time, I'll tell you frankly, we worry about our hostages. We know the sort of violence that Hamas is capable of. We've seen their brutality first up. Firstly, we saw it on October 7th, the way they brutalized our people. They murdered, they raped, they burned people alive, they beheaded. We know what Hamas is capable of. And even more concerned now is the hostages that were released last week have been talking and reporting about what they went through. And so we can only have the most grave concerns about those people who still remain captive with Hamas.
Qatar's Prime Minister said your bombardment in Gaza is narrowing the window for a new truce, which, of course, is what you need to get more hostages out. Do you accept that is the consequence of your military action?
On the contrary, I beg to disagree with my Qatari colleague. He is wrong. Hamas are not going to release hostages because they've suddenly become humanitarians. They're not going to release hostages because they've suddenly decided that they will abide by international law. On the contrary.
No, but it's the negotiations that presumably are the path out for the majority of those still being held.
Correct. And that is why we believe that the only way to facilitate the release of hostages is to keep applying pressure, military pressure on Hamas. And that's what worked last time. That's what
But the Qataris are right at the centre of this. And if they are saying you're narrowing the window for a truce, do you not have to listen to what the context of what they're saying is?
Well, when there's a serious offer on the table, of course, Israel will consider that. We want to get our people out. Getting the hostages out is one of the major goals of our campaign.
But your bombardment is narrowing the window. I repeat the phrase he has used. He's talking about how you get another offer on the table.
So we believe, as has President Biden has said publicly, Hamas responds to pressure. They don't respond to goodwill. They don't respond to calls for international law to be abided by. They respond to pressure. And as we beef up the pressure against Hamas, as we increase the military pressure on them, we believe very strongly in Israel that will expedite a release of our people.
You talk about beefing it up. I spoke to the family of people who have hostages being held in Tel Aviv. They were distressed when they were listening to Benjamin Netanyahu talking about maximum pressure and ramping up the war. They thought that was alarming, and they weren't, they said, hearing enough about how you plan to get hostages out. They were hearing about ramping up the war and maximum pressure, but not, in their view, getting the hostages out. Are you sure it is your priority? You say it is, but is it?
Well, first of all, let's embrace all the families of the hostages, because for more than 50 days, they've been going through living hell, knowing that a loved one is being held by these brutal murderers. And I can only imagine the terror that they're going through, knowing where their loved ones are. But on the substance of your question, it needs to be said, the Israeli strategy that Hamas responds to pressure proved itself to be effective. Just last week, in response to Hamas's desperation for a ceasefire, because we were hitting them hard, we got 105 people out. Over 80 Israelis, and the rest were foreign nationals. We know this is the language Hamas understands. This is the unfortunate reality. When you deal with a brutal terrorist group like Hamas, they're not going to release people because they've suddenly become nice people. No, there is a chance they will release hostages because they are desperate for a timeout in the fighting.
Yes.
And they know the only way they can get a timeout is for them to release hostages. It's worked in the past. I hope it can work in the future.
We shall see if it works again in the future. Let me ask you a separate question. Where are you telling Palestinians to go that is safe this week?
So, to be fair, when we told people to move to the south, when the fighting was concentrated in the north, it was true. And people moving to the south did save themselves. And though dislocation is never easy, it was preferential and remains preferential to staying in a war zone.
So where is safe now?
Where
is safe now?
Now that as fighting has moved to the south, we've designated specific zones on maps which are humanitarian safer areas. The people of Gaza know where these areas are. They've been moving to them. We haven't called for a total evacuation of the city of Khan Yunis. We've been much more specific this time. We've identified the specific areas where we know there's going to be heavy fighting, where there is already heavy fighting, and we've urged the inhabitants there. We don't want to see them caught up in the crossfire, and we've asked them to move. We know it's not easy. I make no illusions. My father was a refugee. He had to flee from place to place in the Second World War. It was not easy for him. It's not easy for them now. But it is preferential to be getting caught up in a war zone and possibly in a life-threatening situation. It is better to leave and to move.
You say you're using maximum effort to avoid civilian casualties. Haaretz there in Israel says that the aerial bombardment campaign is the most indiscriminate in recent years. They point to 2012. A ratio of civilians killed was 40%. Earlier this year, it was 33%. This time, the first 3 weeks of this war, 61%. It is significantly higher in ratio than the average of any conflict, even in the 20th century, with 2 world wars.
I beg to disagree with those numbers, and I think one has to look at the entire campaign before you make a final judgment. But my understanding of the numbers is that, and I've seen our numbers, and I've seen what we believe is the ratio between civilian and combat deaths. And
so
obviously
if you've seen
we're
your
only
numbers,
targeting.
what are your numbers on civilian casualties then?
So I would say the following, and I can't be too specific at this stage. Obviously, we don't want to see any civilian casualties, both for
Sorry,
moral
you said you knew a
reasons.
number, so just tell us what that
Yes,
number is, because over the weeks you've disputed what the Hamas-run health ministry has said.
Well,
so simply just give me your number that you think of civilians that have been killed.
So I can say the following. I can't share with you everything I know for obvious reasons. I'm party to a lot of internal information and confidential information.
I just want a number.
But I can tell you the following. No, but I can say the following. I can't go further than this at this stage. But when this conflict is compared with comparable conflicts against terrorists in urban areas, and there have been such in places in Iraq and Syria.
You said the same answer to me last week, so I'm just going to press you.
So it's true, it remains true. In fact, in this week it is more true.
Sure, you dispute the numbers.
It's even more true.
So simply tell me, you say you have intelligence, just tell me what your number of civilian casualties killed in these 8 weeks or so is, in your view.
In our understanding of the situation, it is lower than that what happened when Western armies fought against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. The combat to a civilian fatality rate, according to everything that I see, and once this war is over and it can be publicized and we can have a more serious discussion about it. And I apologize that I can't share with you internal information at this stage, but that we will compare the IDF's performance and our efforts to save civilians will become apparent. If you
can't give me a number now, let's move on, because we have another vote at the UN General Assembly about a ceasefire. It follows, of course, the Security Council rejecting it over the weekend. Let me read you what the Executive Director of Amnesty International USA has said. With this veto, the US government is shamefully turning its back on immense civilian suffering, a staggering death toll, an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. Why do you think it now is, 8 weeks into this war, that the only countries supporting you are the US and the UK abstaining there in the Security Council, despite everything that flowed out of that barbaric attack on Israel? Why 8 weeks on are you left with just 2 countries supporting your position?
So that was on the Security Council, obviously, and we thank the United States for its veto, standing up to the automatic anti-Israel majority at the United Nations, which unfortunately is a fact of the diplomatic life that no one can ignore. But I think that veto was crucial. Why? If you demand a ceasefire today, unconditionally, you're saying Hamas stays in power. And though for many people, they'll say a ceasefire, just stop the bloodshed, no. Because that means it's a Band-Aid solution. It means just in 6 months or a year, Hamas will once again attack Israelis. They say so. They say they believe in permanent war with Israel. They say they would do October 7th again. If you have an ending here where Hamas remains in power, you're condemning Israelis and Gazans to more war in the future. It's much better. It's preferential. It's good that we finish the job that has been started. Hamas must be destroyed. Anything short of that
it is not better
is
for
just
all
a
those
recipe
civilians.
for further violence.
It's not better for all those civilians who are being killed. And that is what underpins so much concern among different countries at the UN. Just a final quick thought then. Here we are.
Can I just disagree with what you've just said,
okay.
please? Can I just disagree with what you said? If more civilians are killed in another year in another Gaza war, that's not good. It's better we have an opportunity now to rid Gaza of Hamas. And if we succeed, and I believe we will, that's good for Israelis for obvious reasons, but that's also good for Gazans. Otherwise, we're going to go through all this again.
Yep.
Why would we want to go through all this again?
One final sentence. Will there be any change of Israeli tactics?
We're always looking at our tactics. We have to think about everything we're doing on the ground, both tactics and strategy. And our overall goal remains the same: hit Hamas hard and do our best to minimize civilian casualties. We don't want that, as I said, both for moral reasons and for reasons to do with tactics, because we want to see Hamas destroyed, but we don't want to see the civilian population suffer unnecessary.
Mark
Those
Regev,
remain our strategic goals.
We have to leave it there, but
Thank you for having me,
once
sir.
again for your time. Thank you.